We're going to talk about solving by factoring. So we learned how to factor, let me think, was it last week or the week before? Losing track, but we did learn how to factor recently, and we're going to use that same skill in order to find solutions to quadratics. So if I'm given this equation here and I'm told to solve by factoring, the first thing I want to do is to make my equation equal to 0. So I need to bring everything to one side. I also would like for my x squared to be positive if possible. So I want to leave my x squared where it's at, and the stuff that's on the other side is what I would like to bring over with my x squared. So I want to move this x to the other side. So you remember to do opposite operation to move things from side to side of your equation. And currently this x is positive. So in order to move it, I will subtract it to move it to the other side, which right here on the right side is going to cancel and leave 0. And then I'm going to, it doesn't have any like terms. So what I'm going to do is write this in standard form, which starts with my x squared, and then my x term, and then my constant. And then it's equal to 0. And that's how I need it to be before I can begin the process. Remember, the next step for factoring, we want to factor this. And as I look at it, there's no greatest common factor to factor out, so it's ready to factor. And how you're going to do that is you're going to be breaking up that middle term into two pieces. And you're going to take your a value, which is 2, your b value, which is -1, and your c value, which is -15. Remember that you do a times c, which here is going to be -30, and then you need your b value, which is -1. You go to Wolfram alpha over here. You want the product to be -30, and you want the sum to be the b value, which is -1. This is telling us we want a -6 and a 5. So we need to have a -6x and a +5x. I'm going to look at whether I want the -6x to be first or second as I look at my numbers in the trinomial here. So the first number in the trinomial is a 2. 2 goes well with the 6. They have a like term that you could divide out. And the 5 goes really well with that 15. So how I want to divide this up is I want to say 2x squared, and then I want to have the -6x. Then I want to have the 5x, and then the -15. That's probably the hardest part of the whole process, figuring out what you need this middle term to break into those two pieces, which you can see that -6x and 5x do combine to be -1x, and they make for our 4 pieces here so we can factor our pairs. So we're going to take these pairs and we're going to factor out the GCF. In the first pair, the GCF is 2x. When I factor out the 2x, I'm going to be left with x, and then -6x divided by 2x is a -3. The second pair here, always going with the sign that's here, it's going to be positive. The GCF of them is a 5. So I'm factoring out a +5, which will leave me with an x and a -3. Because -15 divided by 5 is -3. This binomial matches this one, so we know we have done it right so far. And we're going to take this 2x plus 5, bring that to a binomial. The x minus 3 will be the second binomial, and now it's factored. So the factoring part has been done. Remember, though, that it was equal to a 0. So we're going to say that this equals to 0. We've done the hard part. Now we just have to finish the solving. In order to solve by factoring, these binomials are multiplying by each other. And you know that any number, say a 5, times the number 0 will result in 0. So we're using what's called the zero product property to solve, which is these are being multiplied with each other. And if one of them is equal to 0, then when you multiply, you will get the number 0. So in order to finish the solving by factoring, you're going to set each factor equal to 0. So on the left side here, as I continue solving, and you're just solving this equation, I'm going to solve by subtracting 5 to isolate the 2x, and then I'm going to divide by 2 to get the x alone. So x is negative 5 over 2, or negative 2.5. That's one solution. And the other solution, I'm going to solve for x here by adding 3 to both sides, which will give me x equals 3. With a quadratic equation, you should generally get 2 solutions. And then that's it. So that's solving by factoring. So you've got to get everything to the same side. You've got to factor. Once you have your factors, you set each factor equal to 0. You solve those equations for your x values, and those x values are the solutions. We're going to look at one more. This one's a special case because it doesn't have any terms with x's in them. The process is still going to be the same for the last problem. We're going to bring everything to the same side by subtracting 15 to move it over. This will leave 0 on the right. 15 is a like term with this negative 10, so those are going to combine. So I'm going to have x squared have a negative 10 minus 15, negative 25. There's no x term. So remember, when I did factoring a couple weeks ago, I would write this as 0 x's so that I can work it the same way that I worked all the other problems. So our middle term is 0, and we're going to be doing the factoring. I'm going to use the Wolfram alpha thing in a minute. So my a value is 1 because the lead coefficient is 1. My b value is 0, and my c value is negative 25. Remember, we want to do a times c, which is going to be 1 times negative 25 is negative 25. Our b value is 0. So then we go over here to Wolfram alpha. We need a negative 25 product, and we need a 0 for the sum. So this is telling me that I need to have negative 5 and positive 5. So we want a negative 5x and a positive 5x because these will add to be 0, and that was what we were looking for. I'm going to have the positive one be first because this x squared is positive, and I'm going to have the negative one second because this is a negative 25. So we've got x squared plus 5x minus 5x minus 25 equals 0. So we have broken down that middle term into the two pieces that we want. Now we're going to factor out the GCF for each of the pairs here. So the first pair, the GCF is x. Dividing x squared by x is x. Dividing 5x by x is 5. The second binomial, negative is in front. We're going to take out a negative. Negative 5 and negative 25 can both divide by negative 5. So we're going to take out a negative 5. It's going to leave me with x. Negative 25 divided by negative 5 is positive 5. And since these binomials match, we know we're on the right track. And then we've got x and a minus 5 are going to create the first binomial. And then x plus 5 will be the second binomial. Now it has been factored. And next we have to just continue on to the solving part. So the hard part of this is done. We're going to take each of these factors and set them equal to 0. So on the left here, solving for x, we're going to add 5 to get the x alone. It's going to leave me with x equals 5. With the equation on the right, I'm going to subtract 5 from each side, which will leave me with x is negative 5. So solutions are negative 5 and positive 5. So again, get everything to the same side. Find your A, your B, your C. Do your A times C and get your B. Plug that into Wolfram alpha to do your factoring of that middle term, that breaking down of it. Factor out your GCF of your pairs. Rewrite to your factored form. Set your factors each equal to 0. Solve each equation for x, and then you have your solutions.